Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is sounding the alarm over demands from the Public Service Alliance of Canada seeking a 47% increase for public sector employees. Political reporter Brian Lilly stops by to address the rumors if we're going back to the polls this spring. And the Crossings Leisure Complex in Lethbridge will no longer be called the ATB Centre as Cavendish Farms becomes the new sponsor.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government teamed up with the federal government to announce more options for affordable and accessible childcare spaces. Officials say up to 22,500 additional licensed private childcare spaces may become eligible for funding. That would bring a total of 68,700 new licensed childcare spaces by the end of March 2026. Minister of Children's Services, Mickey Amery, says these moves will reduce parent fees for most Alberta families.
A Made in Alberta plan that is already lowering parent fees by an average of 50% all across the province. The purpose of the cost control framework and for-profit expansion plan is to make childcare even more accessible and more affordable for all families. I am confident that it will be instrumental in helping us support childcare operators so that they keep doing what they do best, supporting Albertan families. Not only will our framework make licensed childcare easier to afford, but it will also see funding supports directed to more than 22,500 additional private childcare spaces over the next 3 years.
A journalist who worked on the TV series The Fifth Estate is taking over from Preston Manning for the National Citizen-led inquiry into the federal government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Trish Wood steps in for Manning, who was hired by the Alberta government to review Alberta's response to the pandemic. Wood says the country is broken after the last 2.5 years and hopes the inquiry will give Canadians a much-needed voice.
Depending on what silo you were in, you may or may not have believed certain things about the virus, about public policy, about vaccines. And what that did was really tear us apart as a country. And that is, to me, one of the saddest things of all. We can lay down a bit of a roadmap to the future, but also maybe encourage some healing about what happened and weigh if what happened was worth the pain at the end of the day that many of us felt.
An interim report is expected to be released to the public by June of this year. Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says the Trudeau Liberals spent $6.8 million on lodging expenses for 15 people. 15 people who were put up at a Calgary quarantine hotel during the pandemic. That works out to around $452,000 taxpayer dollars per person. Political reporter Brian Lilly explains how this may have happened.
Because the Trudeau Liberals kept this policy in place far longer than it needed to be. Whether you agreed with the policy or not, they kept it in far longer than other countries did who had similar policies. And so you end up with just 15 people staying there in fiscal year 2022-2023. So they could have canceled it. They could have shut it down ages ago. The contract agreement, as Michelle Rempel-Garner found out in the response to her order paper question, it could have been shut down with 30 days notice.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss if the rumors are true that we may be headed back to the polls this spring. He'll have details coming up after business news. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is sounding the alarm over the Public Service Alliance of Canada's huge demands. The PSAC is wanting large wage increases for many of its public sector employees. Increases at a time when millions of Canadian families are struggling financially. Now, to chat about this in more detail is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, who joins us now from Ottawa. Franco, did I read correctly that the PSAC is demanding a 47% increase over 3 years?
Yeah, it's hard to believe just how out of touch these government union negotiators are, because here's what's happening. You have families who are trying to figure out whether they can afford milk or ground beef at the grocery store. Then you have government union negotiators who are pushing for a $9.3 billion increase. They're pushing for up to 47% compensation hikes over 3 years. That would cost taxpayers $9.3 billion. Now, let's break that down. That's an extra $27,500 for each bureaucrat each year on average. So the government's position on this needs to be no way.
Now, the Treasury Board of Canada says the PSAC has a large number of costly non-wage related demands as well. What are they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, these are, again, so out of touch. They are pushing for more paid leave to about 75 hours of paid leave per year. That's 2 weeks of paid leave. They're also pushing for bigger allowances and premiums, including meal allowances. Like, why would taxpayers be paying for meals for these bureaucrats to just walk to a fridge and grab a sandwich? So certainly questions over that. And then they're also pushing for double time pay for overtime. So again, these union negotiators are pushing for up to 47% compensation increases, and that would cost taxpayers $9.3 billion over those 3 years.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. CUPE National President Mark Hancock and NDP MP Alexander Boularice are calling for legislation banning the use of replacement workers in federally regulated workplaces. Boularice made the plea to Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan.
I want to talk directly to the Labour Minister. Mr. O'Regan, now it's time to act. And let's work together in the next weeks on a bill. And on the next Labour Day in September, let's be together and celebrate an historic day with an anti-scab legislation finally at the federal level.
You know, as a union member and a union leader, I've long been frustrated by the lack of anti-scab legislation at the federal level. I'm frustrated that bosses routinely bring in scabs when negotiations aren't going their way and try to pressure workers into accepting the unacceptable. Anti-scab legislation will remove that threat, at least for federal workers.
A Kelowna, BC pastor who fought hard to have in-person worship during the pandemic appealed the decision by the Provincial Court of BC that denied him the right to challenge the constitutionality of the provincial public health order. Pastor Arthur Lucier of Kelowna Harvest Church, who's being represented by the Justice Centre, was issued over $15,000 worth of fines for allegedly holding an in-person worship service. He says it was simply not fair considering the fact that gyms, bars, and restaurants were allowed to host in-person gatherings at the same time back in January of 2021.
I actually, felt that we were supposed to stay open. I'm like, I don't think this is only going to be 2 weeks. And I believe that church is essential, especially when the bar next door is allowed to stay open. And they were allowed 6 people at a table, every second table, and masks were off. People are loud and yelling and having fun, and some of them are drinking, some of them are just eating wings. 200 people in this pub, sitting there for 3 hours without their masks. And next door, we weren't allowed to have 6 people with masks. And this was all to do with science.
Pastor Lucy is one of several BC clergy members being represented by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, challenging the government mandates. Well, we saw some light flurries in parts of southwestern Alberta again today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, the Chinook winds are arriving and bringing us some much warmer temperatures this week.
Yeah, well, it does appear that way, Hal, because by Wednesday, we are going to be jumping up back into the plus temperatures, accompanied by a west wind at 50 to 70 kilometers per hour. So if that doesn't say Chinook, then I don't know what does. Just expect those strong winds to begin this evening with an overnight low of -6. And of course, that's going to be accompanied by some wind chill. So don't let that plus temperature fool you, because by the morning, it's still going to feel more like a -14. But the good news is later on in the week, we are jumping up into the pluses quite significantly. We could even see some double digits by the weekend. I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. A former Mount Royal University professor named Frances Widdowson says University of Lethbridge security will have to stop her from taking part in an upcoming lecture. Widdowson's speaking engagement at the University of Lethbridge on Wednesday afternoon was cancelled after officials deemed it a safety risk to the school. She says she'll still be taking part in the lecture regardless of what U of L staff have told her. Widdowson has recently come under fire for controversial opinions on residential schools and the Black Lives Matter movement. She says she'll be at the atrium at the university at 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Bridge City News will be there to cover the event. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services responded to a structure fire on 5 a.m. on Tuesday. Crews from 4 stations, including Coaldale, responded to the blaze at 316 2nd Avenue South. Fortunately, there were no injuries, and officials are putting together a damage estimate. An investigation into the blaze is underway. Cavendish Farms announced a huge new partnership with the City of Lethbridge on Tuesday morning. The Crossings Leisure Complex, formerly known as the ATB Centre, will now be called the Cavendish Farm Centre. The new sponsorship deal is worth $100,000 a year over the next 10 years. Video journalist Micah Quinn chatted with officials about the importance of this new deal.
Cavendish Farms is all about giving back into the community where we do businesses with our different 5 plants.
The $1 million partnership over 10 years will help deliver curling, skating, hockey, aquatics, fitness, and gymnasium programs, along with childcare, child play, and recreation facilities. Officials from Cavendish Farms told us the company employs 300 workers.
And what's exciting for us is that it's 10 years as of this month when we first came to Lethbridge, and we're very proud of our growth when we first came. We started about 150 million pounds in terms of our plant capacity, and today we're doing over 460 million pounds.
From 2016 to 2021, ATB was the title sponsor of the facility with an agreement of close to $403,000. The partnership was extended to 2022 due to closures during the pandemic. Staff at the city stressed the importance of this partnership in the continued growth of the agri-food economy right here in Lethbridge.
The more irrigated land we have, the more potatoes that we come forward can support this. And this is an agri-food hub, and we're really excited, with having the agri-food hub center opening up here in just a couple short months. This is exciting. It's all a piece of the puzzle to bring the economy back, especially after a pandemic that we've seen.
Signage for the Cavendish Farm Center is set to begin on the inside and outside of the building over the next several weeks. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The sport of curling has continued to grow in popularity, including right here in Lethbridge. From February 17th to the 26th, the Scotties Tournament of Hearts is set to host the best women curlers in Canada in Kamloops, British Columbia. Now, Kirk Mearns, the general manager of the Lethbridge Curling Club, says he has his eyes set on Team Wildcard number 2, who curl and train here in Lethbridge.
We, of course, with Team Scheidegger, we're a big fan of them coming out of our club, and they're going to be they're the number 2 wild card team, and they'll be a force. There's always the big teams, you go through other Team Canada, which is Team Einerson. Holman out of Ontario is always strong and getting stronger. Caitlin Law's team out of Manitoba, again, is wild card 1. And Jennifer Jones. So when you look at that, it's hard to go deeper than that. I don't think you're going to look much past Einerson and Holman to win the Scotties.
The Kerry Einerson foursome have won the Scotties Tournament of Hearts 3 years in a row and are looking to a four-peat this year. The Community Foundation of Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta is now accepting applications for the grant funding program for spring intake. Some of the applications that are open currently include the Rural Life and Community Priorities, which is awarding $300,000. Charlene Davidson with the Community Foundation says these grants are important as the charitable sector is critical.
Anytime we can give them support or the community can give them support, it just enhances their ability to support the community back. So it's pretty important for them. For some folks, we're the first ones in. For some, we're the last. They've been fundraising for a couple of years, and we come in with the last little bit that they need to finish their project. So it's pretty exciting. So there's lots of opportunity for groups if they're looking for some financial support, not sure where they should be looking, give our office a call, have a conversation with our grants coordinator, Caitlin, and she will make sure that you're applying to the right stream.
More information can be found on the Community Foundation of Lethbridge website. A Lethbridge grocery store and eatery is hosting a cooking class this weekend. Now, what makes this initiative unique is that 100% of the proceeds are going to help a worthwhile cause. BCN's Naveen Day has that story.
Since 2013, Umami Shop in Lethbridge has been hosting cooking classes where participants can purchase a meal kit, which includes all the ingredients portioned out, and then cook along with the host. In 2016, the business made the classes available online to accommodate more participants. Patricia Liu, who is the owner of Umami Shop, says the cooking classes are the best way to experience her store.
You'll come into a Umami Shop and you can have a vast majority of groceries from around the world and ingredients, but you might be very overwhelmed by all of these ingredients and may not know how to cook or to use them. But the cooking classes is something that we offer in store and also online. And you can come in and do a workshop, which is about an hour long, or a 3-hour experience where you're cooking up to 5 to 7 different courses and you have a sit-down dinner, and it's a really nice evening.
The next class is taking place on February 4th, and this time the proceeds go to support a worthy cause, STARS. In fact, the class will be hosted from the beautiful kitchen of this STARS lottery home.
Cook for the Stars is the title of it. We've partnered with Van Arbor Homes to create a community initiative, and 100% proceeds will actually go straight to Stars. But this wouldn't be able to happen without our community. Casco Cattle, Subaru of Lethbridge, Vital Green Farms, Luco Farm Mustards, and just people just dropping off amazing products for the kit itself too. So the kit pays for itself and the $30, so it's $29.99 for the kit, and you get a lot of ingredients in there to feed up to 3 people.
So far, over 400 kits have been sold, and they hope to reach their goal of 500 kits by the weekend. You can order your kit online at umamishop.ca. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
And I got to say, that's a great cause and a nice looking kitchen at the Stars home there. You know, a lot of the snow we've had here in southwestern Alberta may be melting once again. More Chinook winds are on the way. Full weather details are coming up. You know, some regions here in southwestern Alberta saw some light flurries again today, but by the end of the week, a lot of the snow may be gone. It should be gone. We'll see. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, those Chinook winds will be bringing us warmer temperatures fairly soon.
Yes, very warm temperatures indeed, Hal. Yeah, by later in the week, we're going to be seeing those double digits again. Is it springtime yet? It is sure going to feel like it this week as we get back to the pluses. So starting tomorrow, Wednesday, high of 2 degrees, but with that wind chill, going to feel more like minus 14 in the morning for sure. By Thursday, we're looking at a high of 4 degrees. It's going to double in temperature by Friday up to 8 degrees, 6 degrees on Saturday. And there we go. There's those double digits for Sunday right there, 10 degrees the high, and then a high of 8 expected on a Monday. So we're going to be jumping way up higher than the average seasonal high for this time of year. So average high at 1 degree, average low minus 13, 14. That was our high temperature on this day back in 1962. And we had the chilliest, which was minus 39. That was back in 1969. Sun rose this morning at 8:06 a.m. and sunset this evening at 5:24 p.m. So we are well over 9 hours, about 9 hours and 18 minutes now these days. Pretty good. Victoria looking at a 40% chance of showers tomorrow, high of 6 degrees. High of 5 expected tomorrow in Vancouver, also expecting a 40% chance of showers. Now, Edmonton could see up to 2 to 4 centimeters of snow, minus 14. The high temperature dropping by the afternoon could see a risk of frostbite as well. High of minus 2 in Calgary tomorrow. Calgary also experiencing a bit of wind chill. High of 17, that's expected tomorrow in Saskatoon. Saskatoon looking at periods of light snow. Minus 13 the high in Regina. And a chilly minus 18 is the high expected tomorrow in Winnipeg. Winnipeg, of course, sitting under an extreme cold warning. They are looking at that risk of frostbite as well there. Toronto could see periods of light snow, minus 4 the high there, minus 7 the high in Ottawa. Light snow expected there as well. And some flurries expected tomorrow in Montreal as well, with a high of minus 8. As we look further east to Atlantic Canada, minus 8 the high in Fredericton tomorrow, mainly sunny skies there. Clearing tomorrow in Halifax, minus 6 the high, minus 9 in Charlottetown, minus 7 expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland, with up to 70 winds and periods of blowing snow over exposed areas. Could see some flurries there as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
An economist from the Royal Bank says there are signs of cracks in consumer spending as Canada's economic growth slowed to just 0.1% in November. Stats Canada's estimating growth was also flat in December. That means growth dropped from 2.9% to just 1.6% in the fourth quarter. Economist Nathan Jansen says our GDP will continue to slow and get into negative territory over the first half of this year. Jansen says there were declines in retail trade, accommodation, and food services, but he says the impact of interest rate increases by the Bank of Canada has not yet fully flowed through to household purchasing power. Imperial Oil had a pretty solid fourth quarter. The company says it earned $1.73 billion. That's an increase of $813 million from a year ago. The Calgary-based company says total revenue and other income was up 17% from a year earlier to $14.45 billion. Company officials say upstream production in the fourth quarter averaged 441,000 gross oil equivalent barrels per day, compared with 445,000 a year ago. Last week, Imperial announced it would go ahead with a $720 million project to build a renewable diesel facility at its Strathcona refinery by Edmonton. General Motors signed a deal to invest $650 million US in the company developing the Thacker Pass lithium project in Nevada. Lithium is used in the manufacturing of batteries for electric vehicles. GM will pay $320 million for 1 million shares or a 9.99% stake in Lithium Americas. The automaker will make a second investment worth $330 million in the company's American business following a separation of its U.S. and Argentine businesses. It will receive access to Phase 1 production from the mine through a binding supply agreement and a right of first offer on Phase 2 production. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 195 points on the day to finish at 20,767. The Dow was up 368 points to 34,086. The S&P 500 was up 58 on the day to 4,076. And the Nasdaq was up 190 points to 11,584. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.15 to $79.05 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 5 cents to $2.73 US. Gold was even at $19.2836 US an ounce, and silver was also even at $23.73 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.97 per bushel. Barley's at $9.25. Canola's at $18.84, and corn is at $11.20 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was up 10 cents to $158.85. Feeder cattle March contract was up $2.23 to $185.50, and lean hogs February contract was down 28 cents to $74.88. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 75.14 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Cavendish Farms announced a new partnership agreement with the city of Lethbridge on Tuesday morning. The Crossings Leisure Complex, formerly known as the ATP Centre, will now be called the Cavendish Farms Centre. The new sponsorship deal is worth $100,000 a year over the next 10 years. A new poll by Nano suggests the federal Conservatives now lead the Trudeau Liberals in popularity by 7 percentage points. And there are more rumblings coming from Ottawa that we may be headed to a federal election in the spring. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have details for us shortly. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Come and take part in this year's Polar Plunge to support Special Olympics Alberta and its over 2,500 Special Olympics athletes. Taking place Saturday, February 4th at Henderson Lake, participants will bravely jump into freezing cold waters beginning at noon. For this fundraiser, registration is $50 and participants are encouraged to gather donations from friends, family, businesses, and their community. It's a great way for all to show support for Special Olympics Alberta and its athletes. For details, registration, and to donate, visit soa.crowdchange.ca. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is looking for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit to 1 visit per week for 1 year. They have many kids that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. To apply, visit lethbridge.bigbrothersbigsisters.ca. And for more information, call 403-328-9355. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says the Trudeau Liberals spent almost $6.8 million on lodging expenses for 15 people. 15 who apparently stayed at a Calgary quarantine hotel during the pandemic. Now that works out to around, $452,000 taxpayers' dollars per person. Now to talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, $6.8 million for 15 Canadians who were put up at a quarantine hotel. Were they having champagne and caviar every night? Something doesn't quite add up here.
Yeah, most likely they were not getting that type of treatment. If you remember the description of the food that people would get at these quarantine hotels when they were a big issue, you know, you'd get a brown banana and a stale tuna sandwich in a brown paper bag. But why did it cost so much? Because the Trudeau Liberals kept this policy in place far longer than it needed to be. Whether you agreed with the policy or not, they kept it in far longer than other countries did who had similar policies. And so you end up with just 15 people staying there in fiscal year 2022-2023. So they could have canceled it. They could have shut it down ages ago. The contract agreement, as Michelle Rempel-Garner found out in the response to her order paper question, it could have been shut down with 30 days notice. Here's what happened. The Trudeau government decided that they needed these quarantine hotels. Hotels were pretty much shut down for a good chunk of the pandemic, very little activity, especially if you're out by the airport. So they went to one of the airport hotels in Calgary and said, we would like to rent out all your rooms. So it was $452,000 for the 15 guests that stayed in the latest fiscal year. By the way, that's guests. We don't know how many nights they stayed, but it shouldn't have been that long. It was generally between 2 nights and 10 at most, and yet it still cost this much. But the year before, Hal, in 2021, they had about 1,350 guests, and it worked out to about $8,100 per person. Again, even if they're staying for 10 nights, that's more than $800 a night at an airport hotel. The hotel can make money charging far less than that. The year before that, it was about $69,000 per person. Again, the hotel can make a lot of money charging far less. So why was the government, why did it cost them so much? All the extra bureaucracy they added on, the fact that they just block booked the hotel, whether they needed it or not. You've heard of the $94 million that they've spent on the hotels for the people coming across at Roxham Road. It's the same thing. The hotels are often empty, but the government just books them. It's a great deal for the hotel owner. It's a bad deal for taxpayers.
No kidding. Brian, Parliament is back in session and it's staying in kind of a hybrid format. Many MPs are not showing up in the House of Commons. Why not?
Well, some of them say that they're immunocompromised, that they don't feel safe. Look, I'm not going to say COVID's over. The World Health Organization says it's not. Doctors I know and respect say it's not. But it's not the same as 2020. And unless you are in really bad health, in which case, with this time of year with flu season and respiratory illnesses going around, you wouldn't have been showing up to the House of Commons anyway. But this allows them to continue to vote, continue to attend committee meetings. I could understand in the middle of the pandemic. I don't understand now. I don't like this. There used to be a rule that if you weren't in your seat, you could be in the chamber, but if you weren't in your seat when the voting started, your vote did not count. Now you can be on the couch in your living room. As long as you're logged in, your vote counts. This isn't how our parliament should be working, and I'm not happy that they've gone this route. The Conservatives have opposed it, but the other parties, they remain in favor.
Speaking of the Tories, during the first QP, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre focused on inflation and a company called McKinsey. Brian, how are the two issues related?
They're not completely and easily related, but what Poilievre was trying to show is this company, McKinsey, global consulting firm. They've got beautiful offices in downtown Toronto, blocks from my office, and just stunning. And the real estate is amazing. So they're a well-off firm. Their billings went from a couple million under the Harper government to over 100 million under the Trudeau Liberals. And this is the firm that was headed up by Dominic Barton, very cozy, a good friend of Justin Trudeau, of Chrystia Freeland. He ended up being named Canada's ambassador to China for a time. So very close relationship between the Liberals and this firm McKinsey. So they got a lot of money. And what Poilievre was trying to do is say, look, Canadians are hurting right now. And as Canadians are hurting, you're spending all over the place, including $100 million on this firm. People can't afford their groceries, but you can afford to reward your good friends. So that was the point he was trying to make. We'll see if it sticks over the coming weeks as inflation, of course, is going to continue to be a big issue.
And Brian, the Tories also raised the issue of crime and its increase across the nation. They blasted the Trudeau Liberals on their record. But do the Conservatives have a plan on addressing violent gun crime here in Canada?
They do. That one issue would be to, scrap C-21 and stop focusing on legal gun owners and focus on the border, focus on the criminals. They've talked about repealing some of the measures from Bill C-75, which passed in 2019. This was the bail reform bill. They have talked about reverse onus clauses. There are a lot of issues and options being raised, including by premiers across the country. Every single premier from every political party, every province and territory signed on to a letter to the Prime Minister saying, we need to change bail. You made it way too easy to get. This is a problem for us because we administer the justice system. You need to fix it. And by the way, we'd like to see reverse onus if you're caught with a prohibited handgun while committing a crime. That's not the direction the Trudeau Liberals are going in. I know there's been an awful lot of focus, Hal, on the issue of crime in Toronto. We've had high-profile attacks on the transit system. A woman stabbed twice in the head, once in the back of the head, once in the face, riding a streetcar in a very normal part of town. You've had people shoved on the tracks, murdered. But crime is not just an issue in Toronto. It's up here, but it is up across the country, and it has been going up for years, and something needs to be done about it. And so far, we get a lot of platitudes from the government, but not a lot of action.
We had competing rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada on mandatory sentences for gun crimes last week, Brian. Are mandatory minimums constitutional, or are they really unconstitutional?
Both. This is why it was such a confusing ruling. And these cases, there were 3 cases. 2 of them were brought together in one appeal. Another was heard at the same time. They all came from Alberta. And so I believe one man was in Lethbridge and shot into a house. He should have received a 4-year mandatory minimum sentence. The man was high on drugs, consumed copious amounts of alcohol, took a high-powered hunting rifle, shot at a car driving down the street, then shot into a home where a husband, wife, and 2 young kids were in for the night. But the judge said, I think this is too harsh a sentence. And hypothetically, a young kid could shoot an airsoft at a home and get a mandatory 4-year sentence. That's cruel and unusual punishment. So they struck it down, not on the case before them, but the imaginary case. The Supreme Court upheld that decision, going on the imaginary one for a 4-year mandatory minimum for shooting up at a house. But there were 2 people convicted of armed robbery, and they appealed their mandatory 5-year minimum, and the court said no, that is actually fine, and it does not go against fundamental justice because of the commission of a robbery is already an egregious act. Adding a gun to the mix just makes it worse. So they upheld it in one, took it away in the other. Many of the mandatory minimums have been removed by the Trudeau government, but not all. You have to remember that. Not all have been removed at this point.
Next Monday, the final report from the Emergencies Act is set to be delivered to the Trudeau cabinet. Now, many Canadians, Brian, are not happy with the fact that it's going to the Liberals first before the rest of Canada can read Justice Rouleau's report. What happened to transparency?
Well, I'm hoping that we at least get it the same day. I can understand the government getting it in the morning and it being released to the public in the afternoon. That would not be uncommon with all kinds of reports. But I can tell you, if it's a Supreme Court decision, the government doesn't find out ahead of time. They find out at the same time as the public, or at best, you'll recall the lockups at the Supreme Court. They find out maybe an hour or so ahead of time, but they're locked in a room and not able to tell anyone. They're just able to prepare an answer for the journalists who are locked up in another room who are going to ask them questions when it comes out. But you don't get a 2-week head start. So the order in council that established the inquiry said that Justice Rouleau had until February 6th to hand a complete, fully bilingual report to the governing council. That's fancy word for cabinet. But it also said he has to lay it before both houses of parliament by February 20th. Now, here's the problem. The Emergencies Act was invoked on, invoked on February 14th. The inquiry has to report back within 360 days of that. That to me is February 17th. So there's an issue with that. It's got to be earlier. There's an issue with the 2 weeks. There's the issue with there's nothing in the law that says the government gets a 2-week head start. So why are they getting it? Why is Cabinet getting it before Parliament? This should be tabled with Parliament and therefore open to the public as well.
Will we see some of the actual Emergencies Act inquiry being redacted? That's what a lot of Canadians are concerned about.
I understand the concern. I would be shocked if it was, because I've never seen that before. That doesn't mean this government won't try it, but I would be shocked. You know, we've seen all kinds of public inquiries and commissions in the past, but you know, redacting the report, there's no provision in the law for that, so it would surprise me.
Brian, next week, premiers are getting set to meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss an increase in healthcare payments. Now, it's interesting to see that Trudeau is being nice to our premiers in some ways, such as saying he wants to see them innovate. But his coalition partner, Jagmeet Singh, wants Trudeau to take a little bit of a tougher stance. How do you think this may unfold?
I think it will unfold with Justin Trudeau being on side with the premiers. And you know, here's the funny thing. Jagmeet Singh represents British Columbia. Sure, he's from Ontario, but his riding is in Burnaby South, in the Vancouver area. The NDP government of British Columbia is doing what Doug Ford is trying to do and what Jagmeet Singh is so angry about. They use private clinics inside the public system to perform simple surgeries. Doug Ford has proposed doing what Alberta already does, because Alberta does this. About 20% of surgeries are done in community clinics, be they not-for-profit private clinics or for-profit private clinics. It's about 20%. BC's a little bit behind there. In Ontario, it's about 2%. And with the surgical backlog, they say, you know what, let's follow what's worked elsewhere, get these easier surgeries out of the hospitals into community clinics, and we'll do it at a reasonable cost, and people will get quicker service. Singh says, no, this is destroying our public healthcare system. Trudeau, you have to stop it. Trudeau's called it innovation, and he says it's up to the premiers to decide how to do it. He just wants them to abide by the Canada Health Act, which says you can't do extra billing. It doesn't say you can't have private delivery. We have all kinds of private delivery, whether it's the clinics I talked about in BC, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Quebec, whether it's your family doctor is a private practitioner that bills the government. These are, your family doctor is not a government employee. So Singh's being disingenuous. And by the way, he just pushed the government to pass through millions and millions of dollars for a dental program that's going to go to dentists' offices, which are private clinics.
There you go. Wow. Brian, Bloc Québécois leader Yves Francois Blanchette says there's the smell of an election in Ottawa. Do you think we may see a vote this spring? The latest polls have the Tories with a 7-point lead over the Trudeau Liberals.
I'm not sure. If I was looking at that poll and I was a Liberal, I'd be saying, let's not have an election. I mean, that's not a good poll for them. They can be close to the Tories and feel comfortable going ahead based on how the votes pan out and the fact that you're confident you'll win in a campaign. But 7 points is a lot, so I wouldn't want to go. I haven't been to the nation's capital in a while, but I do, keep in touch with people. Blanchette's not wrong. I mean, there's a bit of a disturbance in the force, if you will, between Trudeau and Singh that we just talked about. There's Trudeau upsetting both the Bloc Québécois and the Quebec government over his appointment of a special rapporteur to combat Islamophobia, who said very derogatory things about the province of Quebec, about the government of Quebec. That's caused some problems. His talk about stopping provinces from using the notwithstanding clause has upset Quebec. So he's got problems with the NDP, he's got problems with Quebec, but he's also got inflation. And if you're Justin Trudeau, do you want to go out when people are really angry about the cost of everything going up? So we'll see. if things go well for him, maybe he gets a deal with the premiers on healthcare, brings in a big spending budget, and tries to go to the public and say, "Vote for me, and I'll give you everything you want." That's one scenario, but there's a lot of danger in Trudeau going to an election in the coming months that wouldn't have been there had he gone at, say last November or in previous times.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
On October 5th of 2022, the Alberta government announced that Alberta will be the first province to regulate psychedelic therapy. These new regulations just went into effect on January the 16th, but what exactly is it? What's it for and how is it used exactly? So here to give us some of these answers is Cami Tanner from the Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, Alberta. Cami, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you on today. Okay, so Cami, for those of us who don't know, first of all, what is psychedelic therapy and who would benefit from it?
So, psychedelic therapy is using things like psilocybin mushrooms to have a psychoactive experience and helping with treating mental health issues.
Okay, I have heard about this before, so now it's regulated for here in Alberta. So how is it administered? Is it literally like taking a psychedelic mushroom, or is it in a different way, a different form?
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. It's basically doing a trip, but you're doing it under the guidance of a licensed psychiatrist who is licensed to do regulated psychedelic therapy.
Okay, so it's used for mental health, mental illness even?
It is, yep.
Okay, so I've heard about people like going deep into South America and taking part in this in like some little hut. So you're telling me that people can do this now in Alberta. Is it done in a doctor's office? How? Tell me more.
So it will be done in a licensed facility. There are very heavy regulations right now. This is a brand new thing. So we're just kind of feeling our way through this, and things will change and regulations will update as this goes further on. But right now it has to be done in a licensed facility under a licensed professional.
Okay, so basically those are the rules. Can you tell us maybe more about the new rules regarding the use of this therapy that has just gone into effect January 16th?
Yeah, so it's not going to be like cannabis dispensaries where you're going to go out and buy magic mushrooms and go home and take them. That's not what this is intending for. This is for heavy mental illness therapy or treating things like PTSD, depression, anxiety that need to be done under the watch of somebody who's licensed to do this, because there's a lot of things that can come up and a lot of things that happen that need to have some guidance to go through these types of healings.
Okay, like a lot of people might think this is very bizarre. So tell me, how can a psychedelic trip suddenly cure your mental illness? It almost doesn't make sense.
So there was a lot of research being done in the 40s, 50s, and 60s using psychedelics. But the amazing thing about using psychedelics as opposed to pharmaceuticals, pharmaceuticals have their place, but it's more of a band-aid that's covering up things and just helping people to kind of get through their day and manage the day. But the psychedelics are actually going into the body, changing the neurotransmitters, and psilocybin essentially can reset or reboot the brain so that you can have a new way of thinking and changing your thought patterns.
That's interesting because, I remember being a teenager and like your parents kind of preach at you, don't ever try that because it does that, just that. It changes those neurotransmitters. And to us, that seemed very like a bad thing to do.
Well, that's why it's necessary to do it under a licensed professional, because they're going to help you change those routes, change those thought patterns in a healthy way.
How exactly?
So when you go through these psychoactive trips, you're going to confront some of these thoughts or thought patterns that you're having, and they can help you walk through to kind of change the way that we're perceiving things and seeing things in a new way, and rerouting the way that we're actually processing those memories or those thoughts.
So is it the patient in this case takes this mushroom, is tripping, I guess in a licensed facility? Is it almost like there's a psychiatrist there with them to talk them through it?
Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
what we're looking at now is having that psychiatrist within that therapy.
Okay. Have you seen these studies actually become, obviously there's success because the government has now regulated it. So are there any success stories? Do you know of any personally?
Yeah, there's huge success stories. I mean, you can look at Paul Stamets down in the US, who's the huge mycologist, and he's very vocal about his experience with his social anxiety disorders and stuttering. And he did a mushroom trip, and after one dose, he was basically cured. We know people here locally that are, so desperate for this new type of therapy. We've talked to some veterans who are severely suffering from PTSD and have gone decades through this trauma without success through counseling or medication, and gone through one experience with psychedelic mushrooms, and their quality of life has returned back to them.
Okay, so is there a cost to this? Is it private?
We can assume right now that it is going to be a private cost. But when you look at the way that things are now with traditional mental illness treatments, inpatient, outpatient, medication, psychologists, therapies, it can go into the tens of thousands of dollars a month. And usually that's out of pocket, where now we're looking at one psychedelic trip and you have the potential to be healed in that one-time session. So the cost is very, very low compared to traditional methods, even looking at loss of production or loss of time from having to leave your job for these therapies, and the cost on the economy that it takes to put those traditional methods out. So it's going to be very cost effective for a lot of patients.
Okay, so how does this stop the average person then from just going out and buying a bag of magic mushrooms and going camping with their, I mean, you kids, when people are young, they have done this. And I mean,
Sure.
Are there long-term studies of people who have used drugs in the past and now they have no mental illness because they use these drugs? Or is it mostly that coupled with the psychiatrist that they're sitting there with?
There's always people that are going to go out and do this on their own because I think they've done the research themselves and seen the case studies back, like I said, when they were doing it in the 40s and 50s and going, yeah, there is merit to this, but we just don't have things in place. So they've gone out because it has worked for them and they've needed those treatments. But with anything, people are going to do things on their own, but for the most part, it's better to have it done under regulations because you're going to get the best possible outcome. So that's where this kind of medical treatment plays a part.
That's so interesting. This kind of changes that whole campaign, don't do drugs, kids. Right. So Cami, how does this change with what was already available for Canadians?
This is just going to be another huge tool in the mental illness toolbox, I guess you could say. A lot of people are just not having the best results with those traditional methods. And so we're really excited to be able to have this new tool to work with that studies are showing is working amazing.
Okay. Do you know how long the provincial government has been actually working on this?
It's a little unclear. I know we've been watching the Psychedelic Association of Canada, and they put together a very large memorandum for analysis of regulation, and they submitted that to the Minister of Health back in September of last year. So I think Alberta, it's amazing that they've seen the benefits of this, that they're jumping on board. I think everybody was surprised that Alberta was the first province out of all the provinces who could have chosen this. But we're very excited that Alberta is the first province and that they see the benefit of it and that they are moving forward to try and do something better than what hasn't been working before.
Is this some sort of a transformative moment in healthcare for Canadians? It almost sounds like it is.
I think a lot of people, when that announcement came out, were cheering. We're very excited.
Wow. Okay, so can you maybe describe the difference then between psychedelic therapy and psilocybin mushrooms, or are they the same thing?
It's the same thing. So psilocybin mushrooms are psychedelic. So the psilocybin is what is the chemical compound in the mushroom, and when we ingest that, the body turns it to psilocin, which is the psychoactive compound, which allows you to hallucinate and affects your senses and your way of thinking. So it is the exact same thing.
Okay, is this like all natural, or has this been like chemically sort of changed in a lab?
This is all natural. I mean, you can chemically produce it in a lab, but we are looking with our company Pharmasil to produce these mushrooms and grow them naturally and in a very controlled environment. But that's the beautiful thing, is this is natural. It works harmoniously with the body and doesn't really affect long-term side effects like medications can.
Interesting. Okay, I was actually just going to get to your company Pharmasil when you mentioned it there. So yeah, so I understand you and your husband own Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, but you've now started this separate company, Pharmasil.
Yeah, I mean, we're big.
Is it basically to help?
Pharmasil, yeah. So we're big believers in plant medicine and healing the body through natural means. Medicine is great; it has its place, but we've seen the detriments and the downfalls to pharmaceuticals and long-term effects of people not being able to get off medications or lots of side effects. And so we actually started our application process back in November of 2021 and submitted our application early 2022. So we were well ahead of the game before we even knew that regulations were going to be coming out, because we believed so much in it and knew that this was going to be something that was really important to Canadians to help with their mental health.
Wow, that's so interesting that you've been looking at this for so long and been working on this for so long, and now here it is, and you didn't even know that Alberta would be regulating it.
No, not at all.
Wow. Okay, so what do you think is the motivation to use this new medical option? You're mentioning mental illness, but are we talking about, you mentioned PTSD, but could it cure a depression, anxiety, those types of things?
Yeah, that's what it's great for. And so we also have to remember that the regulations, it doesn't just include the psilocybin, but it's also LSD, ketamine, mescaline, and MDMA. So they all kind of play different parts within the brain and do certain things, but psilocybin, yes, for sure, is going to help with PTSD and a lot of stress and anxiety disorders, which it has been increasing, but ever since COVID-19, we have just seen mental illness kind of go off the charts. And so there are studies out there that shows that Canada is, I think it's ranked 3rd or 4th in the world for antidepressant users. So that just kind of shows the monumental amount of mental illness that is happening. We're in crisis mode, and we need other tools to help deal with this crisis.
Okay, so Cami, I know here in Lethbridge we have a lot of issues with opioids, but just out of curiosity, would these mushrooms be maybe an option for replacing opioid in some cases, or maybe even helping with the damage that opioids have possibly done?
Yeah, so this is not going to be a replacement for opioids. However, these psychedelic therapies can actually help with addiction recovery. They've shown a lot of promise in helping people with addictions to opioids.
Cami, are there possibly other uses outside of the realm of mental illness that this could be used for?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of people, when faced with end of life diseases like cancer, things like that, that are fearing death. They actually can take a psilocybin mushroom trip, and it brings a calmness and releases a lot of that anxiety when being faced with death in the end of their life. So it's a wonderful tool in a lot of different ways.
Okay, so it's more of a calming method mentally, not necessarily it's going to physically do anything.
Yeah, it helps them not be so afraid of death. Yeah.
So maybe like let's switch away from the psychedelic mushroom therapy. And I know you have a lot of expertise with herbal options and remedies with Herbal Apothecary. So can you tell us what makes mushrooms in their various forms so beneficial?
Yeah, so we already grow a lot of functional medicinal mushrooms. It's funny because these mushrooms have been used for thousands of years as healing and as medicine. And we got away from them when pharmaceuticals came into play. And it just kind of showed, you can see how our health has deteriorated. And so getting back to a natural way is really quite amazing and really beneficial. And a lot of people are wanting to go back to a natural way because it actually heals the body. It doesn't just put that band-aid on, so to speak. And people are seeing a lot of changes within using medicinal mushrooms to problems that they're having.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so lion's mane is a great one for brain health. There's been a lot of studies done with lion's mane mushroom that has actually on a lot of use of it that has reversed symptoms of Alzheimer and dementia. We have a lot of people that come in using reishi mushroom to help them with sleeping habits and stress and anxiety.
Wow.
So they all do really, really wonderful things. And, it's kind of funny, the old saying, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right. But we fixed it and now we're broken again. So,
wow, it's interesting how the world works. It looks like we are running out of time, Cami. Very fascinating topic, though. I've learned a lot from you, so I thank you for that. And thanks so much for coming on today.
Yes, and thank you for having me. It's always great to share new knowledge.
Awesome. That was Cami Tammer from the Herbal Apothecary in Lethbridge, Alberta. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.